Welcome back to the podcast, Can Silicon Valley Solve Healthcare? The podcast where healthcare leaders talk about technology, technology leaders talk about healthcare, investors talk about impact, patients have a voice, and everyone has an opinion. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Can Silicon Valley Solve Healthcare? I'm your host, Adam Silverman, and on the podcast today, I'm thrilled to introduce Stuart Lackey. Stuart is a founder, an advisor, a business development guru, a sales leader, and a thought provocateur. I met him through a mutual friend a couple of weeks ago. We had a terrific, wide-ranging discussion, and I thought he would be super on the podcast to bring his thought leadership around everything healthcare to our subscribers. So, Stuart, welcome to the podcast.
Adam, great to be here. Thanks for having me, and look forward to the discussion. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely, and as do we. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in Nashville, Tennessee. For those that you don't know, Nashville is considered the healthcare services capital of America. There's probably 600 to 700 health-related companies based here in Nashville. So I've been here for 22 years and been in healthcare for the majority of that time, working in the startup world. Ironically, for companies largely not based here. The bulk of my career, Adam, has been spent in the device world. And so surgical devices, predominantly in neurosurgery and orthopedic spine. So, jumping in with companies, both based on East and West Coast, and helping them scale their business development strategy, building out sales channels and basically, working towards some type of liquidity event, and all the while doing some really good in terms of healthcare relative to bringing hopefully an enhanced quality of care and a decreased quantity of care. So, but healthcare is my passion, and working with young leaders is something that I've recently begun to do. So,
yeah, it's music to my ears, that's for sure. So, how did this journey start? How did you get involved in healthcare?
Well, I kind of grew up in the radio business. So for the amateur broadcasters amongst us, my family owned and operated radio stations in small markets.
Really?
Yeah. And I was a radio bum with my dad, doing production work and occasionally doing an on-air deal. And so as soon as I got out of undergrad, I went and worked for CBS Broadcasting, had a radio division. I think they still do. And then Clear Channel brought me to Nashville in 2000. And about 2 years after that, I got into the device game and realized, even people without, medical training and medical degrees you make a positive impact in the space and provide value. So I've been hooked ever since. And I've got a wonderful wife who's a Tennessean. And so I'm kind of sleeping with the enemy for you college athletic fans out there. And and we have a young daughter, 6-year-old. And we stay busy with her quite a bit.
That's awesome. So let's talk about devices for a moment, because I think you are probably my first guest from the device space. Most of the people I talk to are sort of software or software as a service people type of individual. So for those that may not be familiar with the device industry, can you talk a little bit about what's special about it? What are the specific challenges that device companies have, and sort of where it fits in the overall innovation ecosystem?
Well, I mean, if you look at the advancements in healthcare technology, let's just stick with the U.S. I mean, it's over the last 30 years, it's been pretty remarkable, right? Whether you're talking about diagnostics or surgical technology intervention, I mean, it's been the advent of some of these technologies that really have allowed us to advance in terms of how we diagnose and treat patients. And specifically to orthopedics, the implants and the instrumentation and those kind of things to do like a total hip, for example, like the premise of what that is hasn't changed a lot, but the technology's improved, right? The titanium, the metal and the alloys and the 3D printing that's used to manufacture implants for just better overall outcomes. That's really been the latest advancement in kind of the orthopedic world, over the last probably 5 to 10 years. And, relative to things like robotics, right? I mean, we saw the Da Vinci robot, if that sounds familiar to you guys. advertised probably, starting about 15 to 20 years ago. And,
Right.
and so, hospitals have, that was originally, that was a marketing opportunity only. It still is a marketing opportunity, right? But there was very little good data that showed robotics and surgery was much better than laparoscopic, right? Laparoscopic was the advancement over open incisions. And so we moved towards a minimally invasive or through a minimally invasive continuum in a lot of specialties. So as the incisions got smaller, the technology was a big part of that. And now robotics are used in multi-specialties, right? And they have the dexterity and the precision that, it's kind of hard to imagine what some of this technology can do. And now you're seeing the advent of, augmented reality and VR in the surgical suite, where surgeons are literally looking down into the field, and they're using enhanced AR or VR to even be more precise with decision making. And it's pretty fascinating what's happened in the last 5 years, really.
Yeah, my son went to the dentist the other day. He needed a crown. And the last time I got a crown, I went in one visit. They do the mold. They give you a temporary. 6 weeks later, you come back. They pull the temporary. They put the permanent on. They 3D printed his permanent crown while he waited. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even things like in dental and orthodontics, the way that they, fit and do moldings in a lot of places, they don't even take hard impressions anymore. They use, different scanning technology that can create a precise rendering, down to every detail. And then they, if you're doing something like for Invisalign, as an example, the turnaround for that is very quickly. So they can diagnose, they can assess, and then make recommendations all in the same, episode of care, and then get your appliances back to you really quickly. Right. So all that's improved dramatically.
So
for sure.
Help me understand sort of the regulatory environment. So for what we do, software as a service, we don't have to deal with the FDA because we're not treating anything, we're not diagnosing anything. But when you talk about a device, the roadmap from inception of an idea until it actually gets into a human body is much longer than, say, the development cycle for software. Correct?
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, you're working with the FDA, right? So similar to, the pharma timeline, right? In terms of, a traditional pharmaceutical process for a drug to get approved. Like it's years, maybe decades, right? Through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials and so on. And devices, a little less rigorous, right? So there's, if you have an iterative device and there's a predicate 510K, you can access that 510K, as a big basis of your FDA submission. But then the actual approval process is still relegated to a lot of the approval milestones. And there's millions of dollars. If you're working with a de novo technology, it can be years, right? It depends on what you're starting with and how far along that field or that specialty has come relative to your device category, if that makes sense. So if it's just a small iteration, right, the approval process can be fairly straightforward. But if it's something completely new, novel, and requires a lot more rigor, then it'll take longer.
With that in mind, are startups in the device space viable, or is it really being divided up amongst, really large, publicly traded companies that are doing R&D internally?
So it's both. What you've seen historically are, and again, I'm speaking predominantly kind of in the neurosurgery and orthopedic spine world, Adam, right, but what you saw 20 years ago, you saw companies like Kyphon and that were acquired by Medtronic, I guess probably 15 or 16 years ago for $4 billion, right? You don't see a lot of that type of acquisition, that level, much anymore. It still happens, right? But you certainly can be a startup. Those happen every day, but it's really on the burden of the companies, though, to really not just be equivocal or equivalent with the standard of care. The biggest challenge is it's not developing or going public or that's a relatively easy process if you've got a scalable revenue model and device and the product works. It's really satisfying a financial and a clinical threshold within the hospital system. That's probably the biggest, one of the biggest challenges is differentiation to a level to where it actually makes, to go through the approval process, to go, to get approved like at Kaiser, for example. Right. I mean, that's a Herculean gauntlet for a small company, right? Trying to start out. But if you have something that, tremendously changes the standard of care, then that's a great place to be as a device company, especially a standalone device company.
So let's transition a little bit to your passion, which, as we've talked about in the past, is sort of, our unique healthcare system here in the U.S. I usually ask each of my guests, the provocative question of, is healthcare in the U.S. broken? Hence, can anybody produce a solution to help, solve the issues within healthcare? So give me your riff on the question of, is healthcare in America broken?
This is one of my favorite questions to kind of ponder and think through. And, yes, the healthcare system is broken. And I think, much of when you and I talked earlier, a couple of weeks ago, there are a variety of reasons for that. And, we can even discuss and go back to the origins of healthcare, right? How did we get to this point? And I think a lot of people in our space, they are value focused. They want to be part of, the solutions, whether we're talking about the explosive costs, the 4.3 trillion that we spend a year. They want to fix that, or they want to provide, better clinical solutions. But I think there's not enough people that really understand the history and, kind of the layers over the last 60 years, if you will, that have gotten us to this point. And really having an intellectually honest discussion about, okay, let's look at all of that. And then after we've assessed it, start asking some tougher questions like, is this okay? Have we thought about this the right way? Are there new ways and new models, not just value-based care, newer models that can solve some of the challenges? And these are major challenges. Like I see there's major threats to the way we operate, within the U.S. healthcare system. And I have a top three, and not a top 10, but a top three that, in terms of the threats as I see them, to the U.S. healthcare system. I think the first is chronic disease. No newsflash there. We've been battling it for decades. There's a lot of subtext to that, but the metabolic syndrome, the disease states affiliated with that, I think, are an absolute security risk to our ability to thrive and endure as a body, as a citizenry. And we can kind of sublayer those. I think the second thing is, and again, I've seen this probably more recently in the last 3 or 4 years, again, for a variety of reasons, is clinician burnout. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about, physicians, advanced practitioners, nurses, people that used to love to come to work and treat their patients are, in many markets and many areas exhausted because of a variety of reasons, and that's not what they signed up for, right? And then I think the third thing is really the layers of abstraction that have taken away a true marketplace in health and health services, meaning that the patient, I'll call the patient customer for this part of the discussion, disassociated from really a true marketplace, which I think has drawn or has taken the cost of care to such exorbitant amounts, what we see today. So those three things. So
if I gave you the ability to solve one problem in healthcare today, and it may be the underpinnings of one of those three things. Pharmaceuticals already handled problem number one. We now have Ozempic, so metabolic syndrome is going to vanish, right? Pharmaceuticals solved one of your problems. But if you could, yes, it's a convoluted, complicated, multi-layered industry. It may not even be fair to call it an industry because it just is so intertwined of many industries. It's really an ecosystem of sorts. But, if you had an opportunity today, so, stage 2, whatever stage of your career is, this is the next stage. You got one chance to make, one change. Where do you start?
Again, this is not going to be popular, but, that's fine.
That's right.
I think you have to change the way that we finance healthcare. Right. And, I sent you a link to an infographic that I don't know if we can publish in the show notes or, show during. But it's a great infographic. And I think it was last updated in 2021 based on most recent CMS data. But essentially, we talk about, if we look at 1960, right, and you start before that, people don't know this, the first insurance product, a health insurance product in our country actually started in this great state of Texas in Dallas, it was the Baylor Hospital System offered the teachers union in that area. There were 1,500 teachers, a health subscription. So they would have access to the Baylor Hospital System. I think it was 21 days, up to 21 days of service a year for $6 a year. That was the premium. So it was the first subscription model. And it was also the kind of the original inspiration for Blue Cross, right? I think Blue Cross started in Sacramento, California, 3 or 4 years later. And that was for hospital services. Blue Shield then developed for physician services. And so then you had, this acceleration, for a variety of reasons, again, where we got to kind of the early 60s and we got CMS. CMS was introduced, right? And so in 1960, Americans paid the lion's share of healthcare out of pocket. And they might have had a major medical plan that covered catastrophic and, kind of those major things that might happen. But we paid for physician appointments. The pharmaceutical industry wasn't nearly what it became in the 80s and beyond. And so, but if you look at that infographic, you see that consumers paid for most of their healthcare. And if you look over the last 60 years with the advent of CMS, and then this is not an aspersion on the positive or negatives of Medicare or Medicaid. It's done a lot for a lot of people over that period of time. That's not my point. My point is that we've taken the patient further away, right, from really knowing what the true cost of care is. Okay. Well, some people say, well, Stuart, that's great, right? I don't have to, I don't have to pay as much out of pocket. I get my insurance through my employer. Isn't that great? And it's an awesome benefit. And while that may be true, meanwhile, the total spend has gone from, a small amount in 1960. Again, if you look at that data and you go up to where we are now, we spend $4 trillion a year on healthcare. I'm just saying, is that okay? Can we ask some tougher questions? Like, given all that information, are we in a good spot in terms of scaling from here, right? And then you factor in we're sicker than we've ever been as a country, and we spend more, and we have some of the worst outcomes in the developed world. So I would say I think the biggest opportunity is for all of us to rethink of, how can we refinance healthcare, and not from a kind of a derivative standpoint. I'm talking about getting the patient customer closer to the cost of care, which I believe will bring healthcare costs down, because we will have created more of a true marketplace for healthcare, health services.
So a rapprochement of patient and consumer.
I think so. And, the patient customer may turn some people off, but we got to get real about this. We've gone from asking how much to how much is my copay. Right. And again, is that okay? Is that sustainable? I would argue that it hasn't been okay for a long time. It's definitely not sustainable.
That's interesting.
If you think about, any other major purchase, and healthcare is a different animal because it's emotional, and we're talking in many respects about life and death, progressions, and you got to be sensitive to those things. But in this country, we just assume healthcare, and this is not, again, a socialized versus, other. I'm not talking about socialized medicine. Right. I'm talking about a realized marketplace. It's like, what does an MRI cost? Like, if you, Adam, needed an MRI of your cervical spine today, what's that cost? How would you do it? How would you even know, are there places that can offer a cash fee or cash pay? There actually are. There's a lot of companies out of Nashville that have tried to solve this problem, and, offering more of a marketplace exchange, if you will, to show that, hey, you can afford healthcare out of pocket if you just know how to, right, where to look. So,
no, you're absolutely right. I will say one of my family members, I won't mention which one so I don't throw them under the bus on the podcast, but one of them called me with a relatively minor medical complaint a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
They're on the West Coast, and their health insurance is Kaiser. And, it was like 15 minutes after a musculoskeletal injury, minor injury. And they said, I made an appointment to see my PCP. What do you think it is?
Yeah.
And I said, why did you make an appointment to see your PCP? They said, this happened 15 minutes ago. I said, why don't you give it, a couple of weeks and see what happens? And they said, well, I only have a $5 copay. So what does it matter? And I said, what is your company, what do you pay for your premium on a biweekly basis when you get paid? He said, what are you talking about? I said, go get your pay stub, and somewhere on there is your share of your health insurance. He said, okay. And then I said, and you can double that. and that's what your employer is probably paying as well. And he goes, so I'm not understanding what you're saying to me. I said, well, you're only going to pay $5 for that visit, but your employer is going to end up paying maybe $75 or $150 for that. Or the insurance company is, if it's not a self-insured company. And if there's too many claims this year, then they're just going to raise the rates for the company in the following year. And I tried to sort of outline the domino fall for them so that they would understand it. And, it was just sort of like this eye-opening moment. They canceled the appointment, which was good, but it didn't need to happen anyway. But it's exactly your point. We don't know. Your MRI example is terrific. The whole concept around facility fees. You can go to an MRI, you can go to the hospital radiology group, or you can go to the outpatient radiology group. And if you go to the outpatient radiology group, it could be half the price.
Exactly. And I had a similar example, last year at a similar, I could have gone to a couple of emergency rooms here in Nashville, Tennessee, and that visit, out of pocket, out of pocket, but after the smoke cleared with insurance, probably been over $1,000, maybe more. And, I went and got an x-ray at an outpatient ortho clinic. I talked to a physician, he read the imaging, put me in a boot, and out the door with the boot was $285. Right. And he saw me, I waited a few days. I knew it was broken, but I just wanted to, I kind of was like, oh, let me see if I can kind of push through this. And but I walked in and asked that, I didn't even know, I asked the receptionist, said, do you have a cash pay option? And she pulled out, she goes, here's our cash pay menu. Up to 1 x-ray, it's this price. Up to 2 x-rays, it's this. It was that specific. And I'm like, okay, game on. And, we talk about things like concierge medicine. And I use that term carefully because I know that could probably put a lot of people off as like, well, that's something executives use, or that's an elitist type of term. It's actually not. Concierge is, if you look at the origin of the French origin, that's actually a support person with that's designed to make an experience better or to enhance an experience. And so, I think of things like, okay, we have government subsidies that we use. One of my top 3 was physician burnout. Well, there's a reason for that, right? Because they're all overworked. They have to see increasingly, larger numbers of patients, for compensation reasons, or that's maybe what their contracts are based on if they're employed directly by a large IDN or hospital network. And you ask them almost to a person, they're worn out, and then, if they don't have a PA or a nurse that's in the room during an initial consult, taking the note in their EMR platform, they're looking down and doing the inputting themselves. And there's some really good technology that's addressing that. That's right, in our midst, and hopefully that'll improve. But, the number one issue with physicians is burnout. It really is. They're worn out. And so what if, we could go back to kind of the glory days a little bit, is that we decrease the roles, right? Everybody got a stipend to pay, their physician a yearly fee. You still have your major medical plan, and the physician office would still file it, but you knew that you could get in to see your primary care, but you paid for it, right? And you were deliberate in that process. And, maybe you go from 600, patients on a roll down to 250. And the physician he or she makes, financially what they feel like they should earn. And then their lives are better. They're better at their craft. It works. It's just, we think that we have to, fix things that, from a high level with massive spending on these programs. And I think that's a big part. And it could start with primary care. That's where you would start it. Right. So that's one way. And then you expand, the market, a true marketplace where people could source, direct costs and what those costs would be for services. And I think you've got a pretty good recipe to start down that road.
So you've outlined the challenges and a potential solution for the cost or the price side of the equation. But you said something interesting earlier. You said not only do we have a cost and price issue, we have a quality issue. We're not getting we're not getting value, we're not getting the outcomes for the cost that we're paying for it. So, right. But since you've spent so much of your career sort of in the startup, early stage company milieu, is the venture-backed ecosystem with startups and the way that they're structured, is that really positioned to improve the overall system of care? Or is it really more a financial model so that investors have an alternative place to park their money to make a return?
I mean, I would love to say that that all the deal flow that comes through, Silicon Valley or through VCs is out, there's a level of high commitment to patient care, right? And I think that there is. I mean, people that are in healthcare, they love, the potential of what technologies that they invest in or support could do, right, to improve quality. But the realist in me has to say, okay, the first question is, what's the model? What's the rev model? What's the business, plan? What's EBITDA? How do you scale it? And again, it goes back, like, we've capitalized healthcare, right, in this country. And I'm a capitalist, really. I've built my career on doing healthcare startups. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's like, what's the investable story for a new technology? So a lot of it's about ROI, and it's about an exit. It's about a liquidity event. And so I think the product's got to work. It's got to be safe. It's got to check all those boxes. But once you get to a certain point, it's like, okay, what's the opportunity financially? And I don't know how to disassociate that. I mean, that's my opinion. And I know a lot of good people in the business. Yep. I mean, I work with a lot of them, and they're great people and they're well-intentioned. That's not the point. It's like, they're in business to make money. Right. And so, how do you parse that out? That's a challenge, right? And I think, again, you put more power back into the patient customer's hands, right? And let them make decisions. And again, so much of device, Adam. I mean, you think about reimbursements and, access on insurance plans. I mean, so much of that investable stories is like, what's your coverage? I mean, I worked for a company, based out of Cupertino for about 6.5 years. And the story was, as we built that company, was payer access, right? And with new technology and device, and even, pharma on formulary, that's the story. It's like, and again, that's not about, is it the right thing for the patient? That's about, how are we accessing, commercial payer markets, and are you on plan? And if not, it can be an uphill climb. Right. And that's a financial decision that necessarily doesn't always have to do with patient care in terms of being, of having access on a commercial payer plan as a device company. Right. So,
well, enough of the big, hairy, audacious problems. Let's talk about you. What are you working on today, and what excites you about the future of what you're doing?
Yeah, so I started my own advisory company last year and been working, primarily offering kind of CRO services and advisory services to early stage and mid stage startup companies in healthcare, and really enjoyed that process to this point. Worked with device companies, worked with software companies, worked, with roll-up models and learning some different areas of healthcare. But one of the common trends is that people need help scaling how they go to market and how they really differentiate themselves in the market. So, building out, plans, go-to-market plans, scaling, impact, kind of broadening out sales efforts, and really just honing all of that for early stage and mid stage companies, and finding out that it's a big need. And in Nashville, Tennessee, again, there's 600 or 700 healthcare companies. There's no absence of need. It's like, how do we get our product to market? How do we stand out and differentiate? How do we develop leadership within some of our channels and kind of bring that all together? So, I think it's a great place to be at this point in my career because, I've had a lot of experience doing all of those things in different companies. So, and again, some of these young folks, I'll age myself, they're amazing people. I know people have different opinions on kind of the folks that are coming up, but there's some amazingly talented people that I'm working with. So I have a lot of hope for the future.
That's good, because it certainly seems like our industry has a way of grinding that youthful enthusiasm out of people over time.
Yeah. It's interesting to see kind of the different aspects and kind of on the service side. I'm actually dabbling more on the service side, more so than the device at this point. So that's been really interesting and a lot of fun for me to kind of learn kind of a little different part of the business. And we'll see kind of how things go. But I'm really passionate about this new payment models and kind of seeing what's out there, like who's willing to go down the rabbit hole and really put themselves out there to reconsider how we finance healthcare. So
you made an interesting point in your introduction about Nashville being sort of the center of healthcare, delivery in the country, and the large number of healthcare providers. There certainly are a number of those providers are for-profit entities. The status quo is meeting their needs, right? How do you find the conversations you end up in, with your ideas of how to change the system when you're having conversations with these people that are, their careers are defined by the way it currently works now?
Yeah, a lot of times it's two different worlds. And again, I was on a panel a few years back, and one of the topic kind of shifted, the discussion shifted towards kind of your question. And I think a lot of us that have been in healthcare, whether you like as a physician like yourself or an entrepreneur, we see ourselves as solving healthcare in a lot of ways, right? Maybe not that directly or that implicitly, but we see we want to be in healthcare. We think we can provide value. We see ourselves as part of the solution. And I think, a big challenge is that we've capitalized healthcare. There's a lot of administrative costs, right? There's a lot of people's salaries that are paid on a fee-for-service model. Let's be very honest, right? The more tests that are ordered, the more drugs that are prescribed, the more devices that are implanted, the more we employ people, right? And so we talk about increasing quality, decreasing quantity. That doesn't mesh well, right? And so I ask the question, people, are you willing to disintermediate yourself for the, kind of the betterment of healthcare overall, right? And a lot of people are uncomfortable in that conversation. Right. It's like, what do you mean? I'm not going to, be able to keep my job and, continue to move up the corporate ladder and, kind of those traditional ways of thinking in corporate America. I think a lot of people, it's an uncomfortable conversation because they don't really know, like, if I'm not doing this, well, what am I going to do? How do I necessarily provide value, right, in a corporate environment? And so, yeah, I think I've been in some uncomfortable conversations when I ask that question to people. It's like, okay, you were all just visiting. Right. And so, I think you have to think of like, okay, what's my exit plan here? Because at some point he's like, make the contribution. But I don't know. This is an important question, I think, as an industry that we all need to ask ourselves. It's like, well, maybe we need, less, right? The goal, by the way, is to use healthcare less, not more. So that would imply that we would need overall at kind of that, that ultimate level, we would need fewer resources and fewer people involved to, again, talking about those layers of abstraction, right? So
absolutely. And I think it's not, the issues aren't homogenous when you start talking about some of those difficult questions. So, you look at access, you want to talk about access, access, depending on your zip code may be wonderful, or, you may have no access. You may have a health system that is operating very well in a lean way, where the administration has absorbed the message that they have a fiduciary responsibility to deliver a product to their communities, and so you see a relatively lean administrative structure, and then you see other administrative structures that are ridiculously fat. And I think that people are fond of saying if you've seen one X, you've seen one X, and I think that there is some there's some truth to that, but there's certainly macro level issues, as you have outlined here very well, and I think that there are also micro issues in various communities when we talk about access to care or quality of care delivered in those particular settings.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is getting comfortable. I mean, telemedicine's been around for much longer than it's really.
We just never used to get paid for it.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And, my wife had we had a situation where we had a telemedicine visit, in our home last week, and it was through a very affordable local company that brought in, a PA, and she consulted via telemedicine visit with a primary care physician in Atlanta. And the whole thing was, seamless. And, 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been comfortable with that, but I am now, because I sat there, actually was taking pictures of, she had an inner ear infection and it was causing all kinds of issues. But so the PA that was in the house took a Bluetooth camera that sent all of the images to the PCP in Atlanta. And so I'm there taking pictures of the whole thing. It's like, this is so cool. And, I just, the efficiency of it and with no sacrifice of quality. I was dubious at the beginning of the visit. And then at the end, I was like, that was pretty darn good. And then the note was printed. He printed out the note on a portable printer that was pretty thick, right? And all of that was captured during the visit. And I was like, okay, all right. And again, that whole visit probably, we ran it through our insurance, but I've done that once before. It's like $150, $143. And I mean, we got to figure that stuff out, right? I mean, how do we scale that? How do we educate people, like you said, in areas where that would, those kind of services really are needed, right? Where maybe there's not that, there's not a quality PCP around. And I mean, this is not about, to me, the haves and have-nots necessarily. This is about, the money that we spend. Again, we spend all this money on healthcare. There's got to be a better way to spend it, a more efficient way, and to spend a lot less of it and increase outcomes. And, these are big problems. They are. I mean, it's not as simple as I'm describing it, but we've got to challenge ourselves to think differently about it.
So let's jettison the pessimism. We're coming down to the end of our time together. And one of the things that I like to do is to think about how do we pay our own experiences forward a little bit. So, if you happen to meet a young entrepreneur who had a great idea and wanted to get started, sort of in the healthcare space, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, if it's a great question, and depending on the market that they're in, there's resources everywhere, right? In terms of if you think you've got a great idea, if you've got an entrepreneur center that's within a short drive, or if you can access a resource like that, there's brilliant people all around that are looking to help young entrepreneurs think about their business. And here's the thing. A lot of people think they're cut out to be entrepreneurs, and they get into it and they realize this is maybe not something I'm really cut out to do. But I think everyone should effort to try to start something. I've done it myself. There's probably no more rewarding professional experience than, having to go out, create a business model, create a business plan, raise money, hire a team. And if you can do all that, I don't care if your business is wildly successful ultimately or not. But if you can get to a certain point, if you've got an idea that you're passionate about, you should absolutely go for it. Be intentional, be smart about it, surround yourself with really smart people. And even if you don't live in a town or a market where you've got some type of entrepreneur resource, there are resources everywhere. And a lot of them are little to no cost out of pocket to access that expertise. I would just say take the next step and, know that difficulty is coming. And that's just part of it. I mean, I don't know this is one of the oldest histories or lessons of history that I know of. And a mentor gave this bit of advice to me a long time ago. There is nothing worthwhile that's ever been achieved without difficulty, period. It's the simplest history lesson I can offer you.
Yep.
It's opportunity mixed with difficulty. Go do it. Go figure it out. And it's just, you think about anything worthwhile that's ever been accomplished in human history. Tell me anything that hasn't been accomplished without difficulty, right? So expect it and embrace it. And go find the resources. They're all around you if you're willing to look for them. So
great words of wisdom to end with. Well, Stuart Lackey, founder of The Sound Advisory, among other things. And clearly, we really appreciated the conversation today, your thought leadership. We could go on for a lot longer, so maybe we'll have you back again.
I would love it. Adam, thanks so much. And look forward to seeing you down the road.
And if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to the channel and like and share all of our content with others who might enjoy learning about can Silicon Valley solve healthcare.